Now, we've shown kind of Jesus working with this discipleship, that they are to seek after righteousness as an aspect of discipleship. We've shown that disciples understand. Now, at points they lack faith, little faith, but they understand. And now we come to a major topic that I want to call the cost of discipleship. And as soon as I mention that phrase, cost of discipleship, well, what comes to mind? Well, what you have is, most of us are aware that there was a guy named Dietrich Bonhoeffer. And this is around the time of World War II. And he wrote a book called The Cost of Discipleship that's been published, and many have read now his book on cost of discipleship. And Dietrich Bonhoeffer was in Germany when Hitler was rising in the 1930s, as Hitler was rising up. And he actually was a theologian at the time, and he was a young man as this was all happening, and he saw what was happening in Germany. He actually came to America and studied in America down at New York City, and actually attended a black church down there, and was really inspired by, Swing Low, Sweet Chariot, and things like of the black community and their spirituals and their expression of their faith. He then went back to Germany and then was basically worked on starting a seminary. And this seminary was kind of like not the governmental approved seminary. And so he basically taught in this seminary for a while, developed this thought. He was a pacifist and developed this thought. And as Hitler began to rise, they basically shut the seminary down. And so he again hopped to London and then off to America. And this was now I think it was in the 40s. And the 1940s, and when he came to America, though, this time he realized that something bad was going on in Germany, and he realized that he could not speak to the German people if he fled Germany when his people were struggling. So he basically came over to America. He could have had a very wonderful life here in America and done his thing, but he got back on the boat and shipped back over to Germany and walked right into it, knowing that he was probably going to be killed. And he and some others then were plotting the assassination of Adolf Hitler. And here's a pacifist then, when faced with real evil like that, comes up and says, it's not just enough to turn the other cheek now. We've got to do something. This guy's killing people, and it's really bad, and we need to do something. And so basically was plotting the assassination of Adolf Hitler. He was then incarcerated. And turns out about 2 weeks before the Allies came in and liberated Germany, about 2 weeks before the liberation, he was basically stripped naked, taken out, and hung in a German prison, and died just 2 weeks if he had made it. But that was the Lord's will for his life, but this is the cost of discipleship. And when this guy writes then, Dietrich Bonhoeffer writes and talks about the cost of discipleship, this man knows what he's talking about. He chose to turn around and walk back into that, knowing that would cost him his life. A follower of Jesus Christ. There's also many things in this age. I often ask students, we read about early Fox's Book of Martyrs and other things about how the early church, there was persecution, especially in the first century, not the first century, but the second century, when you had Roman officials. And then in the first century, it was mostly local persecution, people trying to show their loyalty to the emperor and things. But many Christians were killed. James, the brother of John, killed, 44 A.D. Peter, crucified upside down in Rome. Paul, beheaded in Rome. And so you had many Christians. Paul, you remember the stories from the book of Acts, being beat up and all sorts of nasty things happened to him, being stoned, left for dead, those types of things. And so I ask people, when was the great era of persecution in the church? When have more martyrs died than any other century that we've had so far in 2,000 years of the church? What was the century that's most noted for Christian martyrs? And the answer is not the first or second century. The answer is the 20th century. More Christians have died in the 20th century and now into the 21st century than have died in all those centuries of the church. And it's very interesting. Right now we're looking at Nigeria, and up in northern Nigeria, there's basically some Muslim folks that are just killing Christians, going in, taking out towns, killing people that go to church. We remember, and I told, was this a year ago or 2 years ago now, in Iraq, when you had basically, Christians have been in Iraq for 2,000 years. I mean, the church spread there right after Christ's death and things, and the Christian church has been in Iraq for 2,000 years. We took over and defeated Saddam Hussein, and now the Christians are in Iraq. They're worshiping. In Baghdad, there's 68 people worshiping in a Christian church. They're facing the front, and they're worshiping in a Christian church service, and all of a sudden, an Islamic terrorist comes in the back with a machine gun and kills 68 people. Shoots them in the back, kills these people, innocent people, no weapons, no way to defend themselves. They are shot dead. And then you ask yourself, where is this in the media? Where is this? It was a one-day media story, and then it was gone. I even asked in my class, did anybody hear about this? And there was one or two people that even heard about what happened. 68 Christians shot dead in the back at a worship service in Baghdad. Nobody even barely knows about it. Actually, in my class, it was really interesting. One person said, I wonder what they did to deserve that. And I'm sorry, that's like upside down, okay? You're blaming these people and so these people are helplessly shot like that? Nigeria, what about southern Sudan and things like that? I mean, Muammar Gaddafi, and he's out of power now. Muammar Gaddafi is dead, but Libya, he was paying Muslims to go down and kill Christians from the northern part of Africa. And again, Christians dying. The world just kind of blinks their eyes and shuts and makes excuses for it and says, well, it was just a crazy person that did this. And you say, wait, it's happening over and over and over again. What happened? Oh, the Arab Spring, the wonderful Arab Spring of 2011. And then you ask the question, what just happened in Egypt? They freed themselves. Yes, the freedom in Mubarak from Egypt. And then all of a sudden you say, what happened to the Coptic Church? The Coptic Church has been in Egypt for 2,000 years. And they're burning down churches and killing Christians. And this they call the Arab Spring, this great period of freedom. And Christians are dying, and everybody's applauding that they're finally getting democracy, and the democracy is leading to the death of Christians. And again, who says anything? It's all hushed up. Nobody says anything. Okay? Very little. And so what I'm saying is the cost of discipleship is very real. And as I look at many of you young people that are taking this class now, my heart breaks, because my guess is you're going to see persecution like you've never seen before. That there's how should I say, things are not getting on an upsurge here. No, things are getting more and more militant and things. And as a Christian, you're going to end up very likely having to see these massive movements against Christianity where people are killing Christians or worse, in some senses, inhibiting Christians so the Christian message cannot be proclaimed. And so what happens is you get governments saying, well, you're not allowed to do this, you're not allowed to do that as a Christian. So it's something we need to think about, the cost of discipleship. And so I just want to work on this notion, the cost of discipleship. You remember that girl in the Columbine shooting, and as the one boy came up and was killing kids in his class, and he asked the girl, puts a gun to her head, and says, are you a Christian? She says, yes. He pulls the trigger and shoots her right in the head and kills her dead. And we say, what a tremendous testimony. The last thing is, are you a Christian? She says, yes, and she dies at that point. Tragedy. That was in America, out in Colorado. So, cost of discipleship. Let me just read some comments from Jesus, okay? This is from chapter 10, when Jesus is sending the 12. He's sending his 12 disciples out, and he's warning the 12 disciples of what it's going to be like when they go out. And he says this, for I have come to turn a man against his father, a daughter against her mother. A man's enemies will be members of his own household. And everyone who loves his father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. And anyone who does not take up his cross and follow me is not worthy of me. Okay? I think another passage from actually one of the other Gospels basically says this. Jesus says, and this is an interesting passage too, I did not come to bring peace, but the sword. This is Jesus Christ speaking. He says, I did not come to bring peace, but the sword. And so you ask, is Christianity a religion of the sword? And you say, well, yeah, Jesus teaches, I did not come to bring peace, but the sword. And so people say, see, Christianity is a violent religion too. Wrong, okay? You got to look at the context there. What is the context? He's not telling his disciples to take up the sword. When Peter takes up the sword and lops off Malchus's ear in the Garden of Gethsemane, Jesus says, put up your sword. Those who live by the sword die by the sword. Okay? Jesus says, I did not come to bring peace but the sword. What he's meaning is that you disciples, as you go out, the sword is going to be used on you. And Jesus says, what's happening here is not bringing peace, but the sword will be used on you. It's not a call for them to take up the sword. He's just warning them that the sword, that death is going to be the destiny of what? The apostles. All of them die of martyrdom, except John. We wonder what happened there, but and Paul we know as well. So the cost of discipleship, the discipleship issue. And it's an interesting thing for me with the disciples. You've got all 12 of them. Judas hanged himself, from betraying Jesus. Paul will die as a martyr, beheaded in Rome. Peter will be crucified upside down because Peter does not consider himself worthy to die like Jesus died. And so it's interesting that all the 12 apostles basically die of martyrdom. Like John, there's some question there what happened, but with John, because he lived into the 90s, but basically all of them die of martyrdom. And you say, that tells me something about Christianity, because before Christ rose from the dead, these guys were all running scared and hiding and things. And now after the resurrection, you see the power of God in their life. And it's just an interesting testimony to the truthfulness of Christianity. These people died. They didn't make up legends about Jesus. These people died for what they believed. They died for their beliefs and things. So, and when you get all 12 of them dying, you'd expect that they were just making up myths and legends about Jesus, that one of them would say, hey, we just made that stuff up, man. It's okay. You don't have to kill me and things because it was all just made up. No. They all went to their death having proclaimed Jesus Christ, risen from the dead.